Okay, welcome everyone to the first HSS Equity Speaker Series of the fall semester. We have been doing this for, let's see, I think 4 times in the summer, and I'll be showing you where you can see those prior sessions and talk a little bit about those. But I wanted to give a big welcome to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. We think that these conversations are really important in helping us to advance equity here at Mount SAC. Okay, oh, why did that advance? Here we go. So before we really get started, a couple notes in terms of accessibility that might be helpful to you. You can access closed captioning through Otter AI, and it looks like that is actually disabled, so let me do that right now. Sorry, everyone's gonna get to see the screen that pops up. Okay, so that should work now. You should have live captioning through Otter AI. In the upper left-hand corner, that should pop up and there should be a sign that says live on custom live streaming service. And if you click on that, it will open a window where you can view a live transcript. If you would like to make sure that you are able to see the sign language interpreters, we recommend that you use full screen mode so that you can change the participants to gallery view. This way you can expand the window to be larger and see more than 5 people and also still see the slideshow. If you're not using sign language interpreting, we actually recommend that you don't use full screen mode so that you can easily see the chat window as well as the participants and 5 camera views. I'm going to show you where you can find the toggles to go from full screen out of full screen or into full screen. So on a PC, there's a button at the top right corner that says enter full screen or exit full screen. On a Mac, there's this little green button that you can push to enter or exit full screen. If you are on either a Mac or a PC, on your options, there should be a view options and you can exit or enter full screen. If you are on an iPad, there are totally different ways of doing this and seeing more than one video at a time. If you go to where a video is and you click in the upper corner, there should be a plus sign that you can click on and that will add more video options for you. In terms of audio and video, something that we want to make sure that everyone is aware of is that we really want your input. This is meant to be a discussion, not just someone talking at you, although we will have Peter Cow speaking to us for a little while here. So if at any point you would like to, you can please enter questions into the chat. We would love to have those. At any point, you might be interested in muting your video. In other words, you might want to pause your video or stop your video for whatever reason. If you plan to have your video come back on, we would ask that instead of turning off your video using the stop video option, instead you do something with a physical object, maybe a sticky note. You somehow cover your screen. So it could be, you know, some way to cover your screen, like this, for instance, instead of stopping your video. What that will do is it makes it so that your video does not move around, so that any participants that are using ASL interpretation, the videos don't move around for them. So please, again, if you are having your video on and you wish to mute it at any point, just cover your video in some way rather than turning it off. If you have any questions or comments, you can please type them into the chat. If you'd like to stay anonymous, you actually don't have to send messages to Alejandra Pulido, who is not moderating today. Whoops, that's a mistake. In fact, there will be a link that is being placed into the chat, and you can post anonymous questions on that link. So that way it's completely anonymous. You don't even have to give your name to Alejandra. the session is being recorded. Again, if you would like to maintain your anonymity, all you have to do is simply not speak and you will not be recorded. Okay, so welcome everyone. Today we have this agenda. We are in the welcome currently right now, and we will then hear from our guest speaker, Peter Cow, who is a professor of sociology. We will then have a question and answer session. This is a really interesting topic. I have gotten a preview of this talk and it is really fascinating. So I'm sure there's going to be some pretty interesting questions. We'll do a closing, and then if anyone would like to, we'll have 30 minutes here where you can optionally debrief. So you're not required to stay for that portion, but if you would like to, if you'd like to continue talking, we will continue this Zoom meeting until 5 p.m. Okay, so let's talk about the HSS Equity Speaker Series. I want to show you really quickly the website where you can also read about our mission. I'll read the mission first. A series of talks where administration, faculty, staff, and students come together as a community to broaden our awareness of equity issues and develop action plans that we each can use to enact change against racism. So I'm going to show you the website for the series. You can go to mountsac.edu/humanities/a-call-to-action. And that link should be being posted in the chat. You probably went to this link already so that you could access today's event. The Zoom link will always be posted above the flyer on the day of the event. I wanted to show you this website because I wanted to show you a few things. One thing is that we always will be accepting questions, either for the current speaker, or if you have ideas or questions for future events, you could post those there. The next thing I wanted to show you is that at the bottom of the page, we have information about our prior events. So our inaugural event was on June 23rd, and we had Dean Carolyn Hoover speak to us. And it was a really great way to open this event because this is the HSS Equity Speaker Series. And so the Dean of HSS came and spoke to us. We then had a panel of some incredible students talk to us about their experiences at Mount SAC. Some of the really wonderful things that they experienced, but also some of the things that were really hard. And so there are some really interesting information, and I highly recommend that you go back and watch that talk. Dr. Mika Stewart, who is also a sociology professor and now the social justice studies coordinator, and I believe Title V equity coordinator. I don't want to get that wrong. She has another role as well. But she spoke to us as well about having conversations in a cross-racial situation. So having conversations about race, which can be hard in any circumstance, but in a situation where you're talking to someone who's not the same race as you. And that was also an extremely enlightening event. Highly recommend watching that. That's available for you to watch if you click on this link. And then finally, we had Dr. Eric Lara, who is an associate dean who looks at student success and equity. And he spoke about the different student services programs that we have available. That video is still being processed. We will get it up to you very shortly, but I wanted to let you know that you can access all of our past events here. And so this event, when it is over and we have updated the captions, will also be posted on this website. The space that we have here, the HSS Equity Speaker Series, is meant to be a safe and brave space. So we want to make sure that it is a harassment and oppression-free space that is derived from respect. So that means that anyone who comes to the series is agreeing to work and care to secure a safe and brave space for all participants. And so these are a few ways that we have come up with that you can help to foster a safe and brave space, but there are others. If you are interested in sharing your own resources, we would be happy to hear about them. You can post them in the chat. We really would want to make sure that everyone acknowledges and respects the emotional well-being of others, that we amplify Black and Indigenous and other POC experiences, that background images in Zoom should reflect the values of mutual respect and civility, that we should be conscious of privilege, our own privilege, the privileges of others, privilege in general, right? We should be intentional about not inflicting harm on others. We should engage in challenging conversations, but with mutual and self-respect. And especially important, we want to make sure that everyone has a chance to share, especially students. If students are wanting to share, we want to make sure that their voices are heard. Today, we're going to be learning about race. Peter Cow is going to be giving us a talk entitled Race 101, a little bit about Peter. He is currently an adjunct faculty member at Mount SAC in the Sociology department. His research focuses on white supremacy in Protestant Christianity. So without further ado, I give to you Peter Cow.
Thank you all. Make sure you all can hear me. Wait real quick for the adjust. Okay, let me share my screen here. So want to correct something real quick. There was a misunderstanding, miscommunication about the title. So the title is Racism 101, Race versus Ethnicity. The content of what I'm presenting today will still remain the same. Just want to make sure you understand the title so it all makes sense. So before I continue, there is a poll that we want to launch and to ask about everybody's perspective. So we can launch that right now.
If for some reason you are not able to see the poll, you can type into the chat and we can try to help you. So we'll have to pull up for about another minute or so. If you haven't responded, please make sure that you respond to this poll. All right, 10-second warning. I'm closing the poll now and sharing the results.
Okay, we'll quickly go over most of we'll quickly go over the results here. Most of you are students, welcome. And we have just kind of a spread across the people visiting here, attending this today. Second question, do you agree with the following statement? I can choose my own race. The majority of you disagree, saying you cannot. About a quarter of you says you can. And number 3, do you agree with the following statement? I can choose my own ethnicity. The majority of you, 47% says agree, 30% says disagree, and some unsure. And number 4, do you agree with the following statement? A person can be biracial or multiracial. The great majority of you agree with 81%, little disagreed. And then last but not least, do you speak English with an accent? And 48% of you said yes, and 37% said no. So we're gonna examine and try to get a better understanding of all of this. So again, thank you all for having me here today. I've been a participant of the Call to Action series, and I'm more than humbled and honored to be asked to talk about and speak during this series. And what I wanted to address and what the team felt was necessary was to get a better understanding of the concept of both race and ethnicity, because based on my research and also what I'm just watching, observing in society, a lot of people, in fact, probably most people, at least in the majority, misuse these concepts and therefore perpetuate the problem that continues to happen. So with that, let's move forward with the presentation here. So, oops, sorry, trying to move the window. So I want to start off with a quote. A lot of my research is based on the sociologist W.B. Du Bois. And I think one of his most famous quote is, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, relation of the darker to the lighter races of men in Asia and Africa, in America, and the islands of the sea. Now, Du Bois made this statement back in 1903, over 100 years ago, and he analyzed the problem to be the 20th century. And many of us scholars in sociology who look at the problem race continues to see this problem, and that the problem has extended on to the 21st century today. So we're going to examine and see how this problem looks in our society today. Now, there are 2 points that I want to address and come across to you today. The first is that race is a social construct. We're going to explore that a little bit later and see what that means. And the second point is that, oh, there you go, race is not biological. And a lot of the talk that I follow and listen to, many of this misconception that we still think race is biological as well as ethnicity. So we're going to explore these ideas and hopefully get a better understanding after the talk today. So let's go back. What does a social construct mean? You probably have heard that phrase a lot, that race is a social construct, and you know, we don't really give more, think more deeper about it. But what does that mean? So social, right? We're going back to the study of sociology. So for us sociologists, it's a systematic study of society and social interaction. Now, what we're talking about is people and how we interact, and that's the social aspect. Now, construct, right? You think about construct, you're building something. And so with social construct, people are building meanings and ideas into something in society. And now for us as a society, there are 2 keys to developing and conveying the culture. We use symbol and we use language. So we're going to take these ideas and explore that a little more. So I have a few examples to show you. The first is a box with designs on it. And so for those of you, let's say the pandemic's over and you want to have a friend come and have dinner. So your friend says, okay, I'm going to bring pizza. And your friend shows up with this box. Well, that doesn't make sense, because we as a society, for those of us who understand what this box represents, this is Chinese takeout. And most likely a pizza cannot fit into that box unless you're going to scrunch it up, right? So we understand this box as a symbol that represents Chinese takeout. Let's go to another example. The number 9 3/4. Unless you have an understanding of what this means, it's just a number that says 9 3/4. But for those of us who understand and have read Harry Potter or watched a movie series, this number represents the platform that a student in Harry Potter take to go to their school of Hogwarts. And is actually 9 3/4, is actually 9 3/4. But again, this number represents, a part of this whole world of Harry Potter. And unless we have an understanding of it, it doesn't mean anything to us. Move on with another example. 3 burnt pancakes. These are just 3 black circles. Right? But for those of us who understand what this represents, it represents Disney, Mickey Mouse ears, right? The happiest place on earth, right? But for those of us who don't understand what this means, this is just 3 circles next to each other, or as I would like to say, 3 burnt pancakes, right? So again, we as a society has given meaning to these symbols and images. Let's go a little deeper with these ideas. This is a piece of fabric with design on it. And more specifically, this is the flag of the United States. And now, as a flag of the United States, it represents a lot of things to many people. For many, it represents honor, patriotism, freedom, and a bunch of different things. Now, look at it differently. What would this flag represent to countries that have been either has a military presence there or has been attacked by the US military? How would this flag represent, or what does it mean for the Native Americans in this country, right? Again, these symbols had different meanings, one for different people. Last one. This is a cross. And so for many people, it means Christianity, it means God, it means Jesus Christ, right? But what would this mean to someone who is Muslim? Or what would this mean for someone who's Black and saw this burning in their front lawn, right? So this has different meaning, and we want to get a better understanding of what all these images and symbols mean, and this is what we do in sociology. And in the same manner, when we talk about race, the same exact thing, right? So race, as a definition, it's a group of people whose inherited physical characteristics distinguish it from others. It's a problematic term because it's usually used in a way that has no scientific basis. Race is a social construct. I want to emphasize the problematic term because it's usually used in a way that has no scientific basis. And for example, you see someone like me who is Asian, and we automatically interpret that to be this person is good at math, or this person knows martial arts, right? So when race in itself has no meaning behind it, we as a society has given meaning, constructed meaning into it when there's no meaning in it at all. And that's what happens with race, and that's what happens when it's misused and misunderstood. Now, the other term, ethnicity is a shared culture which may include heritage, language, religion, and more. And so with ethnicity, it's all about culture. Now, many people also misuse this idea and concept and use it in a way that is, again, more towards a biological instead of a sociological. And so we're going to take these concepts and explore it a little more. So then what is the difference? I'm going to kind of explain and look at how the interaction of society can help us better understand these terms. Okay. So the question there in the beginning is, can we choose our own race? Can we choose our own ethnicity? Simply put, can we choose our own race? No, we cannot, right? I can't go out there and say I'm white. I can't go out there and say I'm Black. Race is because someone looks at me, right? And that's how they perceive how I look. And I look Asian, right? And so for the poll, we have most of you disagree that you can choose your own race. And then also, most of you agree that you can choose your ethnicity. Well, for ethnicity, you can. We have the ability to choose our own ethnicity because it's part of the culture. Think about it this way. I'm Asian, but what if I was adopted as a baby by a white family in the United States? Would my culture be that of Chinese ethnicity? No, I probably wouldn't speak any of the Chinese languages. what I would come to know and see the world would be through the culture that I've grown up in and learned about, right? And so more or less, my ethnicity would be more of a American culture, right? Here's another example. Can you be racially Asian, but ethnically Mexican? I use this same example in my class, and we always get a difference of opinion. But you can be Asian and be ethnically Mexican, right? So especially if you go down to Mexicali, there's a little neighborhood down there called La Chinesca. It's filled with people that looks like me, but their culture, their language, meaning their food, a lot of them has come to be absorbed and acculturated into the Mexican culture. Now, this neighborhood here has been there since the late 1800s because a lot of them were Chinese immigrants who were not allowed into the United States because of the Chinese Immigration Act of 1882. And so now we are talking about Asian, Chinese, descendants of Chinese people from since the 1800s. We're talking about third or fourth generation. And so their culture will not be anything similar to that of mainland China, but their culture will be more similar to what is around in Mexico. Right? And I'll give you one more example. If all of us here wanted to move to, let's say, South Korea, because we all love K-pop bands, right? So we all picked up and moved there and we lived there for 10, 20 years. We are going to absorb that culture from South Korea, the food, the language. And so our ethnicity is going to be a little more, closer to what South Korean culture is. And also we are still going to retain our American culture here and also other cultures that we have with us. But again, because of its culture, it's always fluid. It's going to change, and we're going to absorb that as we go along. Let's take these ideas a little further now, because in the U.S. Census, right, we just did the U.S. Census. If we have not, it's definitely very important to fill that out. Let me switch a window real quick here. In the census, they would like, just they want you to think that you can pick your own race in there, but it could be very problematic. So Pew Research Center has created this timeline of the categories that were used in the census from every single census dating back to 1790. So I'm going to go go through every decade, and I want you to pay attention to this left column because that's what's going to change, not the 2020, but the left column. So the first one is 1790, and we have the categories of free white males, free white females, all the free person and slave. So I want you to keep an eye on the chain on the left column as we kind of keep going here. (1840), right? So now we have in 1850 different categories of black, mulatto, black slave, and mulatto slaves. Keep going. And now we have the category of Indian, which I assume is the Native American, but according to the census, they did not exist before 1860. That is very problematic. In 1870, we have the Chinese that immigrated here. And now in 1890, we see black category has been separated, the black, mulatto, quadroon, and octoroon. The quadroon means you are 1/4 black, and octoroon means you are 1/8 black. I'm going to come back to that idea later on in this presentation. Keep going. So that category is back to black now. And the Japanese is added to the Asian category. And then also down here we have an other, okay? Keep going a little further. 1920, more Asian categories. In 1930, we have the category of Mexican, because according to the census, Mexicans were not here in the US until 1930. But then again in 1940, they left. So what happened there? Keep going, 50, 60. Now we see a lot more categories in 1960, especially with the Asian, also with the Native Americans, right? Again, still no Mexican, still no any part of the Latino population here. 1970, now remember, this is after the Civil Rights era. This is 1970, right? And so now we have the categories for Latino, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, and other Spanish. Let's go on a little further. Okay, more filled out for the Asian categories. I keep going. Two things I want to bring to your attention here. Okay, so first, this is on the left column, 2010. We are still using in the census a derogatory term in our census to identify the Black population. Now, remember, this was under when the United States had their first Black president, but yet in the census, we are still using that term. That term was first used in 1930 in the census. So why did it not change for 70 years? I don't know, but that'll be something fascinating to look into. And also, perhaps a bigger problem that we see throughout the census, if you didn't catch it already, throughout the entire census history, there is one category that has never, ever changed, and that is the white category on top. If we go on top and randomly click, it's always a white category, right? It has never, ever changed. And so that in itself presents to be a problem, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So with this idea that's presented in the census that we have this ability to choose our own race, right? So, but is a and more recently in the census, I believe in 2000, they started allowing people to claim more than one race if you're quote unquote biracial. Well, it comes the question from the poll earlier, is it possible to be more than one race? Or some people say biracial. Now, even sociologists have used that term to say biracial. Based on my study and my conclusion, I disagree with that, right? And so back on the poll again, I can choose my own race going down. A person can be biracial, multiracial. The great majority of you agree with that. I disagree with that based on my research, and I'll explain why, right? So is it possible to claim more than one race? I don't think it is. And then is it possible to claim more than one ethnicity? Yes, definitely. And the examples I shared with you earlier kind of speaks to that. And we also have what we call this multiculturalism, right? Because ethnicity refers to culture and culture changes and it's fluid, we can be multiple cultures. And so, but I want to explore this idea of how it's not possible to be more than one race. Okay. For example, biracial. We have two individuals here. One is Chloe Bennett. She's an actress. I believe I don't know which show it is. I think something to do with Marvel.
Avengers.
Avengers, that's what it is.
Or no, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Sorry.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Her name is Chloe Bennett, but her real name is Chloe Wayne. She chose the name Bennett because she knows that the last name of Wayne she will experience discrimination in Hollywood. So she purposely chose the name Chloe Bennett. On the right, we have Mike Shinoda. He is a musician, and I believe he's the lead vocalist for Linkin Park. Right? If we were to look at these two individuals alone, would you automatically think biracial, or do you automatically put them in a certain racial category? That's different because, again, race is on our perception of the individual. Okay, let's move on with some more examples. Biracial. We got three individuals here. Cash Warren, who's a film producer, Gabrielle Reese, who's a volleyball player, and Slash, who's a musician. Here's a poll that I want you to take to think which one has a Black parent. I think we're winding down. We're closing the poll shortly.
Yeah, let's give it 10 more seconds. 10 more seconds to get your answers in. Answer, I suppose. Last chance, going, gone.
So the great majority of you voted for Slash, the guitarist, who was the lead guitarist for Guns N' Roses. I played a trick on you. It's a trick question. All three of these individuals have a black parent. And so technically, all three are what, some people might say biracial. But then when we look at these individuals, especially Gabrielle Reese in the middle with blonde hair and blue eyes, you do not think that she has a black parent. And you might even question her if she says, oh, my father was black. Right? Again, so this biracial understanding doesn't match up to the reality of what is happening when we talk about social interaction. Last couple examples. Former President Barack Obama, which is the 44th President of the United States, and also Senator Kamala Harris. These individuals have parents that are from different racial backgrounds. Barack has one white parent and one black parent. Kamala has one black parent and one Asian parent. But yet, how do we identify them racially? Do we say they're biracial? So let's take Barack, for example. If we say we're biracial, does Obama get to decide one day he's gonna be white and the next day he's gonna be black? Does he get the treatment, especially from the media, that treats him as a white president one day and black president the next day? No, right? We called him our first black president. And so this idea of biracial is actually more problematic, because when we talk about bi, which is two, we're thinking of two parents, two different racial background, and their child is the creation of the two different racial background. But that idea brings race back into the arena of biology. It doesn't bring it into sociology, all right? Again, race is a social construct. So what happens in reality when we have someone, quote unquote, that's biracial? More specifically, how does our society refer to a biracial or multiracial person? Do we say Barack is a light-skinned black person, or do we say Barack is a dark-skinned white person, right? And by that alone, we've already categorized a person into the category. We use a light-skinned black person. So this biracial or multiracial is actually more problematic than a good grasp of what the sociological understanding is. And this all came from the history of what is known as the one-drop rule. It's a classification by whites of anyone with even a drop of black blood as not white, right? We saw earlier in the census, we have black, we have mulatto, we have quadroon, we have octoroon, right? The way that people have been racially categorized as anything white or not white, as we see throughout history. And this one drop rule continues to influence how we think about race today, especially in terms of biracial or multiracial. Let me try to present this in another story here. So we have on the left is Maria, and on the right is Lucy. Now these two young girls grew up together. They're great friends. You can tell they're probably having like a slumber party, sleepover party with the pajamas, going to school together. They grew up, they're pretty much best friends, right? Well, they are best friends. They act like sisters, and that's because they are sisters. And they are actually twin sisters, fraternal twins. So on the left picture, you have Lucy on the bottom, and you have Maria on the bottom right. And the individuals are their parents. And on the right is a picture of them grown, right? So technically, some people would categorize them as biracial. But if you look at Lucy on the left, do you ever think she will be treated as a black person for a minute in her life? Most likely not. When we see someone like Lucy, we automatically assume she's white and we will treat her as white. Compared to Maria on the right, she looks like a light-skinned black person. And again, race is how we perceive the individual to be, and that how we approach and treat the individual is based on our perception. So then how does this all relate when we talk about race and ethnicity? What about racism, which is today's talk, Racism 101? How does this all play out, right? And so for us to understand how racism functions with its concepts of race and ethnicity, we need to examine this concept of race within a framework of white supremacy. So now, what is white supremacy? What does it mean? What does it look like? How does it function in our society? We're going to explore this idea, and so then we can all get a better understanding of white supremacy, racism, and how race functions. Now, for most people out there, when we talk about white supremacy, these are the ideas that come to mind, right? We'll start from the top left here. Top left is Nazi Germany. We'll go clockwise. On top right is the Ku Klux Klan. And bottom right is the Confederate, who supported slavery. And on the bottom left is the neo-Nazi. These are the ideas of white supremacy when we use this concept, white supremacy. And more recently, we have come to this organization known as the alt-right. There was a rally back in, I believe, 2017, right? And again, white supremacy brings up these kind of ideologies and these kind of people in mind. Now, I personally like to think more by using a graph. So if I were to graph people's understanding or definition of what white supremacy is, we probably think of this line as this equal identity where everybody, white, black, Latino, Latina, Asian, First Nation, right? For most of us who, especially after the post-civil rights era, we are all equal. And for white supremacy, it means that there are these individual groups that promote and advocate the superiority of the white race. And that's how we think white supremacy is. Well, I would argue, no, this is not the case, especially what sociologists and race scholars have defined white supremacy to be. So we're going to take this and look it through of what white supremacy is. Now, before I begin to even talk about white supremacy, I want to acknowledge and put everything into context. This is a picture of the genocide that happened to the Native Americans. And so we can't even have a conversation unless we acknowledge the land that we are on. So for us, for those of us at Mount Sac, we are on the land that was once inhabited by the Tomba. They had the land everywhere from San Fernando Valley all the way down to Balboa, a huge piece of land. Now, for those of us who are joining us from elsewhere, your land was part of the nation of another tribe. And so unless you are actually Native American, you are an immigrant. That is an actual fact. And so this is how the map locally of Southern California looks like. But now let's take it into a bigger context and look at it globally. This is a map of the world, right? And so the different color represents what happened with European colonization. And so just about every single country, nation has been controlled, influenced by European colonization. There's only 4 countries on there that has not been colonized, but you definitely make the argument, especially with globalization, that they've been influenced by European culture. So we want to put that into perspective of how white supremacy has spread in ideology throughout the world. Because if we don't put this in a context of the history of what happened, our conversation might look a little something like this.
I never consider myself, as you do, a part of an ethnic group.
I just wonder, doesn't it seem kind of deep to you that the fact that you have no answer to that could actually be a source of meaning, experience, or knowledge?
The opposite is how I feel about you, Victor, that you have no comprehension that the world is open to you. You think that the white man is a block and a dam to your progress, and he is not. I think you put up that dam and that block yourself in your regard to the white man.
See, I think that's one of the major problems with racism. I think he did answer the question.
Yeah.
As a white man, he doesn't have to think about his position in life, his place in the world. The history books tell him, as they are written, that this world is his. He doesn't have to think about where he goes, what he does. He doesn't have to think like a white person. The way the world has been set up, America in particular, white is human.
Equally, white is a human being.
Right. That's what a human being is. They step into a world that is theirs.
Back to the question of what it means to be white. I think what it means to be white, in part, is that you have the privilege of blaming people of color for their own victimization under white supremacy. I've heard you say that to me. I've heard you say that to him. I've heard you say that to him. I've heard you say it to him. I've heard you say it to every person of color in the room who challenged your perception of yourself in the world. That is part of what it means to be white.
Maybe that's part of the answer. That we feel that the field is wide open and each man can stand on his own.
No. Each man does not stand on his own. Some men stand on other men and other women. Light-skinned men. Men from Europe stand on the heads and the parts of men and women and children of color. That is, and of course, you also stand on the heads of white women. But no, it's not a question of every man standing on his own ground. All of the ground, damn near, of this planet has been taken from almost all of the people of color on this planet. Australia was a black continent. Africa was a black continent. North America was a red continent. South America was a red continent. You are not standing on your own ground. You're standing on red ground. And that's what it means to be white. To say that you're standing on your own ground and standing on somebody else's. And then mystify the whole process so it seems like you're not doing that.
So we need to have proper context, especially in history, when we talk about race. And we need to understand it from a global and historical perspective. And so let's get a little deeper into this idea of white supremacy, taking the definition by W.B. Du Bois again. White supremacy was all but worldwide. Africa was dead, India conquered, Japan isolated, and China prostrate, while white America whetted her sword for mongrel Mexico and mulatto South America, lynching her own Negroes a while. This theory of human culture and its aim has worked itself through warp and woof of our daily thought and a thoroughness that few realize. Everything great, good, efficient, fair, honorable is white. Everything mean, bad, blundering, cheating, and dishonorable is yellow. A bad taste is brown. The devil is black. I want to emphasize this part, this everything great, good, efficient, fair, and honorable is white. Basically, what Du Bois is saying, that anything and everything positive is white, and anything bad and negative is not white. So I want you to keep that in mind. Going on, the changes of this theme are continuing to run in picture and story, in newspaper heading and moving picture, in sermon and school book, until of course a king can do no wrong. A white man is always right and a black man has no rights, which a white man is bound to respect. And this part, I want to emphasize this part, the changes of this theme. Basically, Du Bois is saying white supremacy is everywhere. It's part of the culture. And so this was published in 1920, 100 years ago. And so we want to ask the question, has anything changed? And I'm going to use this clip, two clips coming up, to kind of show you what has happened. Now, for those of you who did not see this from a couple of years ago, this was in France. A baby was dangling from the window and a man climbed up to save him. So that was what happened in the news. And Trevor Noah of The Daily Show provided an excellent critique and actually used the frame of thought that W.B. Du Bois talked about, as I mentioned earlier. So I want to show this clip of Trevor Noah analyzing what happened. But let me give you a little context for this clip. So back in 2018, the World Cup, France won the World Cup, if any of you follow a World Cup series. But Trevor Noah made a joke about the World Cup and saying that Africa won the World Cup because the great majority of players on the French team was of African descent. And so the ambassador of France was not happy about the joke and wrote a letter to chastise Trevor Noah about what happened. And so this is Trevor Noah's response.
And here's why it vexes me, to be honest. This is what I find interesting, is like, when I read stories from Africa and when I watch what politicians say, especially in France, about African migrants, when they are unemployed, when they may commit a crime, or when they are considered unsavory, it's the African immigrants. When their children go on to provide a World Cup victory for France, we should only refer to them as France. And we even saw it with that African man who climbed the building to rescue the baby. Do you remember that? We watched him climb that building. He rescued the child, and then they gave him French citizenship. They said, you are now French. So now so is he now no longer African? Is that what you're saying? So when he was on the ground, he was African. And then he climbed up, and as soon as he rescued the baby, now he's French. So if he dropped the baby, the African dropped the baby.
And again, the ideology, right? Everything positive is attributed to white, and everything negative attributed to non-white. And we've seen that more recently too with what happened, especially with George Floyd. After he was murdered, the media and people started saying that, well, he had drugs in his system, right? But we look at what happened in Kenosha, the white shooter, they started passing around pictures of him cleaning up graffiti, right? And so there's this, we attribute positive aspect to white and not negative attributes to Black people. And so this theme carries on even till today. Let's explore this idea a little further, right? How does race affect our identity? And I created this little exercise for y'all to join. So these categories, I want you to answer these according to for yourself. And so your race, your ethnicity, language, name, birthplace, and citizenship and nationality. So I answered and created a column for someone who is considered to be your average American, right? Especially if you go to another country and you ask what race is an American, the answer will most likely be white. Ethnicity is American because the person who grew up here has American culture. The language is most likely going to be English. A name, average John Smith. Birthplace is any town USA, and a citizenship is a nationality. And now I've also filled out these categories for myself. So I have my race is Asian, my ethnicity is Chinese, my language is Mandarin, that's the first language I spoke, and my name is Peter Cao. I was born in Taipei, Taiwan, and I left citizenship and nationality with a question mark on purpose, and you'll see why. So I want you to go through this exercise and ask yourself this question. If you are not white, does your, and we insert the criteria, get questioned or ridiculed? Because that's what discrimination and racism is about, right? So let me give you an example and we'll work through this. So first, ethnicity. Remember, it's about culture, right? So if you are not white, does your culture, or in this case, food, does it get ridiculed? Do people think the food of your culture is gross and nasty? If you are not white, do people ridicule the practices of your culture? If you are not white, do people ridicule the music of your culture, the clothing of your culture? Right. Going on, language. Do you have an accent? Right, we answered that in the poll earlier, right? If we have an accent, I think about half of you said you don't. Well, if you were to talk to any linguist out there, everybody here has an accent. We all have an accent. That is a fact. The only reason that you don't think you have an accent is because you are surrounded by people who talk and sound just like you, right? We all have an accent. And so that is a linguistic fact. And then going on, what is the official language of the United States? Some of you might think it's English, but it's not, because the United States does not have an official language. English is the language that is most widely used, but it is not the official language. So what happens then when we are trying to play around with the concept of race and language? Well, up in Montana a few years ago, this woman on the left was at a gas station speaking Spanish with her friend in the gas station. Both her and her friend are American citizens, right? But they clearly do not look white. And so therefore, the Border Patrol agent, who was also in the gas station, asked them for their IDs, just based on the fact that they were speaking Spanish. Now, would the Border Patrol agent have asked the IDs of two white people speaking Spanish? Most likely not, right? And so, and now these two celebrities here, they do speak Spanish. But again, that racial perception combined with language, we're trying to figure out how this works and how racism operates. Moving on, name, right? Your name. If you're not white, does your name present discrimination? So if your name is Hispanic, you will experience discrimination in finding housing. If you're not white, you will have less job interviews. If you're not white, you might have a difficult time finding places for vacation. And so these are all studies that sociologists do to find out what's going on in discrimination. Now let's take it a bit further here. George Zimmerman, this is an individual who murdered Trayvon Martin. If you look at George Zimmerman's picture alone, you don't know really how to categorize him. But you see the name George Zimmerman. Well, what if his name was Jorge Carpintero, right? Because Jorge Carpintero is the same exact translation as George Zimmerman, because Zimmerman and Carpintero just means carpenter. And so we have to ask, will George Zimmerman get the same trial as Jorge Carpintero? And so that name alone designate how we see the individual. Let's go on one more. Birthplace. If you are not white, does your birthplace get questioned, right? And we've seen that. We've seen what's called birtherism against Barack Obama. If you are not white, does your birthplace get questioned? And we've seen that accusation against congresswomen who are not white. If you're not white, does your birthplace get questioned? And we've seen again, right, the birther attack on Kamala Harris. We do not see this type of attack on Hillary. We do not see it against Hillary Clinton, and we're not seeing it against Joe Biden. We are seeing it on politicians of color, right? And more recently, during the COVID pandemic, hate crimes against Asians. And a lot of Asians have heard the phrase, go back to your country. In reality, Chinese Americans are one of the first people of color to come to this country that were here before Polish, Irish, Jewish, Italian. They were here since the late 1800s, but yet they are not still viewed as part of the American culture. And last but not least, remember I put a question mark for citizenship and nationality. And so this is a picture of my wife. Some of you within the Mountain Stack community might recognize her. She used to teach in the ESL department. One of us is an American. And so the reality is my wife is a Canadian. I am the American citizen in our relationship. But yet in our 6+ years of marriage, she is usually assumed to be the American, not me. And when we talk about getting a fiance visa for marriage, people automatically assume that I'm the one getting the fiance visa, not her, right? So again, this is how race operates with all these different categories. And this is what it would look like in our interaction when we talk about race.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
No. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, where are your people from?
Well, my great grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Top of the morning to you. Let's get a small tea. Double, toil and trouble. Mind the gap! Beware, Jack the Ripper! Bloody hell! Pip pip! Cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
And so when we have preconceived notions of people in regards to race, interaction might look like something like that. And so now comes the question, with this analysis, do people of color share the same social status as white people in the US? Are people of color valued the same as white people in the US? Right? We just examined everything, what's going on now, but let's also examine it through history, right? So historically, if you are not white, you can be taken against your will and forced into slavery. If you are not white, your children can be taken from you and sent to boarding school. If you're not white, you could be excluded from immigrating into the country. If you're not white, you can't live in certain neighborhoods. If you're not white, you can be rounded up and put into a concentration camp. If you're not white, you cannot attend the same school as other people. If you're not white, mothers and children will be out there protesting to prevent you from attending the school. And if you see on the sign, the kid on the right, all I want for Christmas is a clean white school. If you're not white, you can't sit at a counter and enjoy your meal. And if you're not white, you can't drink from the same drinking fountain. And if you're not white, you could be forcibly removed from your home so they can build a baseball stadium where you used to live. And so we ask ourselves, right, how does this look throughout history and what's happening? And white supremacy is something much more pervasive and subtle than the action of explicit white nationalists. White supremacy describes the culture we live in. It's a culture that positions white people and all that is associated with them, whiteness, as ideal. White supremacy is more than idea that whites are superior to people of color. It's a deeper premise that supports this idea, the definition of whites as the norm or standard or for human, and people of color as a deviation from that norm. And so going back to the graph that I showed you earlier, a better graph to kind of position how race operates today would look a little more like this, that the American identity equals white, right? And people of color are not that. And so therefore, equality does not exist today. And so when you consider certain people within American identity, policies and actions are made for those people who are considered in the American identity, right? And we see this happening throughout the entire history up until now. And for many of us sociologists who studies race, a simple definition of white supremacy is just the normalization of whiteness. And so speaking to you here, here's a confession. White supremacy is not just something that white people practice. people of color can subscribe and buy into this ideology, right? And so myself, growing up, I've definitely made fun of people who has an accent. I've definitely made fun of people whose food is a little different and smells different from me. I have subscribed to this idea of white supremacy, of what is supposed to be dominant, right, and what is not. And so therefore, I, as a person of color, have subscribed to this idea of white supremacy. And so this is not just something that white people practice, it is an ideology. And so we see that in our culture, right? With movies such as Crazy Rich Asians, Aladdin, even Rush Hour, right? This is part of our society. We see things like Los Doyers, which makes fun of the accent of Latinos who can't say Dodgers. Chris Rock at the Oscars. Rihanna appropriating Asian culture, right? And even with Zoe Saldana portraying Nina Simone because she is lighter skinned. And so this is all part of our culture. So then how would our society look if race was reversed and certain roles within our society? I'm going to show you a few pictures, and I just kind of want you to analyze the pictures on their own. And so I want to wrap up here, right? So the mission of this speaker series is to broaden Mount Sacs community awareness of equity issues and develop actions that we can each use to enact change against racism. And so I want to challenge you all with this question. So if you are not white, is your cultural identity represented within the Mount Sac community? Right? And for those of you who are visiting with us today, ask that question for whether it's your workspace, your community, institutions that you belong to. And also, if you are white, are you listening and amplifying the voices of those who lack representation within the Mount Sac community? And I end with a quote by Desmond Tutu. If you are neutral in situation of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. And I believe we are going to move forward to a question and answer period.
Peter, can I ask you to unshare your screen? Okay, so we are now moving on to the question and answer portion of today's talk. You can go to this link if you would like to submit anonymous questions, but you can also type questions in the public chat. I believe that we already have had several questions posted, so we can start there. I think, Francesca, you were taking notes of those. Otherwise, if you would like to, you can also speak aloud your question by raising your hand in the participant section. Francesca, do you want to give a question?
Sure. There's a question by Grace Hansen from the chat where she says, my children are 50% Latinx from my side because I'm Latina and 50% Caucasian, Midwest American from my husband. So are they not biracial? My son has dark skin, dark eyes, dark hair. His twin is blonde, light olive skin, and green eyes. So how do they identify? Is it just based on looks? I don't identify as white, but I'm blonde with olive skin.
Excellent question. And I kind of touch upon that with examples I use in my presentation, especially with a fraternal twin. So their life experience is going to be how people perceive them, right? So myself and my students in my class, I've had multiple students, a Latino student who says that they're of a different skin tone than their siblings. And so they are going to experience different treatment. So again, I want to mention that this idea of biracial is problematic, right? Because again, 50% of this, 50% of that, well, that's biology. And we know this is not a biological matter. There's no such thing. And so if your child looks more white, people will treat them as someone who is white. If your child looks more Latino, people will treat them more as a Latino. So hopefully that, help make sense. Again, this is something we have to unlearn ourselves, because our society has continued to perpetuate this idea that race is biological. So that's for that question. Francesca, you have another question?
Thank you, Peter. No more questions at this moment. So if anyone would like to ask a question, you can either raise your blue hand. And Grace Hansen has replied to you. She said, yes, we have to unlearn assumptions that light is better than dark.
Indeed, yeah. And so I think part of, to continue on with that question, I think part of that problem is also for the United States. Again, the identity is associated with whiteness. There is no effort to push for a multicultural identity. I know because my wife is Canadian and I've learned some of the Canadian history, the government there has pushed for a multicultural identity as the Canadian identity. And I believe it began in the 80s. So now we see Canadians today from all different racial backgrounds, right? They can claim, they're proud to be Canadians, and all different racial backgrounds. So we have, as a society, have to learn that multiculturalism, multicultural identity is the American identity and not just white.
Awesome. We have a question from Michaela.
Sorry, I'm unmuting. Peter, first of all, thank you so much. That was really fabulous. So bear with me here, but I'm still struggling with the race, the ethnicity, and then I guess, how does the religious background, so if I jokingly, and I do it a lot, say that I am culturally Jewish, is that completely erroneous?
I don't think so, but of course, a lot of Jewish people would, this is something that has been debated within the Jewish community itself, right? Mm-hmm. And so the Jewish, one, Jewish is a religion, and it's also a community, a culture. And so someone can definitely be a Jewish ethnicity because they grew up Jewish, there's certain practices and cultural patterns. So I've even heard people distinguish the religion Jew. I'm practicing Jew, meaning like you practice the Jewish religion, and then someone who's a cultural Jew. And so that is used depending on the individual. But from a sociological perspective, we examine the culture, including religion. So even if you're Jewish by religion, that is still going to be part of your culture as well, because as we know, religion plays an important role in people's lives.
So just my follow-up is because I'm not religious, right? But that's, definitely, I guess I'm 50%, Ashkenazi, right? So, and I grew up in that culture, so I identify with it. But if you asked me anything, about practicing Judaism, I'd be a hot mess. And so I'm just trying to make sure I'm not
I think
perpetuating the problem.
For sure. I think ethnically, right? Let's take myself, for example. I identify ethnically as Chinese, but we are talking about a quarter of the world's population here. And so my understanding of what Chinese ethnicity is completely different from someone who is currently in China or just immigrated here, right? And so remember, because ethnicity is part of culture and culture is very fluid, it changes over time. And so I don't know, no one has a definitive fact on who gets to be this or that when it comes to ethnicity, right? Because even, how do you put ethnicity into a bubble? How do you draw a border around it? You can't, because it's going to shift over time. And so therefore, our understanding of a certain culture and ethnicity is going to change, right? There might be some key aspects, but over time it's going to change completely as well. So hopefully that answers a bit for you. It's going to be a continuous study for you as well, because again, it keeps changing.
Thank you. This was fascinating.
Okay, Peter, one of the questions from the anonymous survey that we sent out, are fair-skinned Latinx people considered white?
Excellent question. It, again, depends on how people perceive that individual, right? And so, for example, the George Zimmerman picture I put up, he looks a bit darker skinned, right? But with the name of Zimmerman, people can categorize him to be white. And also, if you look back on the history of names, people have changed the spelling of their names. Right? We've seen, instead of using Z's, people use a name, the letter S to kind of anglicize the name spelling of the names. People change it differently. My name is Peter. That is not my birth name in Mandarin, right? But I, came up with an English name, Peter, so people can say that properly. But however, racially, you look at me, well, you can see that I'm not white, or at least white American, right? And so I'm trying to anglicize my identity to kind of fit in with what is happening here in the United States. So lighter, fairer skins Latino can definitely be categorized as white. We've seen, not just in census, but other surveys that have been given out, we have what's known as there's white Hispanic and white non-Hispanic. And so that itself is also problematic because racially, both, people taking the survey for that, they're still white. And so that presents an inaccurate, result of who's considered white and who is not. So hopefully I've explained that a little further. Again, this is a very complex issue. And so with race, it is just about how people perceive you to be. Any other questions?
I can read another question. This is an anonymous question. How does passing as one race or another inform social constructs of race? The twin sisters with different phenotypes are defined entirely by their phenotypes?
For that, we look at, again, how people treat the twin sisters, right? And so our understanding of race is going to change or not, right? Our understanding of race is based on what the cultural understanding is already. So unless we actually go in and take a look at what race actually means, we're just going to perpetuate the same problem. And so we see this is why there is still white supremacy and racism in our society, even though W. Du Bois diagnosed it 100 years ago, right? And so we see problems, especially, for example, we look back in history, we have communities, mob communities lynching Black people, and now we have the murder of unarmed Black men, right? So the type of murder has changed, but the way we view the Black community has not really progressed much. And so the phenotype, again, about the race, it's about how we see that individual and how our understanding of that racial group and category, that is going to affect how we react and take action against an individual. Hopefully I understand that. Great question. These are very complex questions.
Yeah, the questions are great. I have one more for you, Peter. This question is from the chat. How do we address, excuse me?
Oh, sorry. And then right after we'll have Brian.
Okay. How do we address the influence or deconstruct colorism? This has been a question and dilemma that some of our Filipinx students have brought up, exacerbated by colonialism and other Western ideologies.
Excellent question. And this is something that's a struggle, especially for us who study race, right? Colorism within certain racial groups. We see it within the Latino population. We see it with Filipinos. Again, this ideology that whiteness is good and better, right? I have plenty of Latino students who said they grew up and the parents said, don't go play out in the sun because you'll get darker, right? They have this ideology that darker skin equals bad. So this is the struggle that we as sociologists, especially race scholars, have, because it shouldn't be that. And that colorism alone is upholding white supremacy. I just recently read an article about the Netflix reality show. I think it's Matchmaker. It's about like this Indian wedding. And so the people that are presented on there, they're very fair-skinned Indians, right? Versus the darker skin, because again, the ideology is that white is better. So excellent question. I don't know how to tackle that other than we have to dismantle this type of thinking in ourselves and within our society. And so, Carol, you said that someone had a question?
Yeah, Brian is next.
Hey, Peter, I want to say you did an amazing job with this presentation. I do have a lot of questions, but I guess I'll ask one question that I am still struggling to find an answer regarding Puerto Ricans. I mean, we know the history of Puerto Rico. It is part of is a U.S. territory, correct? So I know it's very complex, learning the history about it. It's very interesting. They're living best of both worlds. And from your understanding and from your knowledge, do Puerto Ricans consider themselves Latinos or white?
Excellent question. And so before we start, Puerto Ricans are Americans. A lot of people don't know that, right? They are a territory within the United States. There's even surveys done where people don't think they're American. No, they are by citizenship American. So this becomes problematic in the field of how people categorize Latinos, right? Again, we have these terms that we use, especially in sociology, that kind of puts people in this category. For example, I'll use the term Asian, right? The term Asian was created in the 60s during the civil rights era for political power because there was not a lot of representation in politics in the US for Asian. But when you use that term Asian, that's problematic because that single, let me take a step back. Chinese and Indian alone make up more than half the world's population. And so when you use the term Asian, you just, by one term, you define more than half the world's population. And we want to put all that group into one single category, that doesn't work, right? And so I can definitely see when different groups within the Latino category, come together and use that for a political purpose to get their voice heard. And I think that's great. That's a beautiful thing. This is the same thing we do with people of color, right? And so these names and categories is going to change. Now, as far as whether Puerto Ricans are considered Latino or not, that I don't have a definite answer to. I would consider they do, partially because they speak Spanish as well. But again, people within Puerto Rican backgrounds may not agree with me. And so again, these categories are going to change over time. Racial categories change over time. Who was considered white legally changed over time. And so we have to look at the history of, not only, remember, because race is a social construct, we have to look back and throughout history and see who's considered what legally or not, but not also based on law, but based on how we as society perceive certain groups of people. Any other questions?
So I think that right now what I would like to have us do is, I just want to point out one more time, this is our website. I'm going to go to that one more time. And I'd like for you all to just check out on the website, there is a survey. Right now it is still collecting questions here, but it is also there to collect topics and ideas for future HSS Equity Speaker Series events. So if you can go to the website, we would love to get any ideas, any things that you think are really important that we as a Mount SAC community need to discuss. My internet is really slow right now, so it's still loading, but there will be a survey that loads here in the middle of our webpage. Please, if you have any thoughts, any ideas of what you would like us to talk about in future events, we would love to hear them from you. I'm going to wrap us up for today in terms of our official event. I want to let you all know we will be meeting again on September the 28th. At least we think that may be the case. The speaker is to be announced. So look out for announcements for our next event. It will be on a Tuesday at 3 p.m. You will see announcements in the Mount SAC email. You can always visit the website for information and to submit questions. And at this point, I'm going to stop the recording, and we will move on to having open discussion if anyone else would like to stay to debrief. Thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.